In Other News is made possible with the financial support of Ariel Investments and John Rogers and generous Chicagoans like you. Thank you.
Thank you for tuning in to see what's happening in other news, the stories and people besides or behind the headlines. Tonight we're talking about one of those jobs that has a great title and can actually impact each and every one of us. But in so many other ways, it is a crappy job. The person elected to sit as the state's attorney for all of Cook County can seldom please even half the people. You're too tough, you're too soft, you're too political, too independent. Typically, they're in the headlines regularly, and usually the news is nothing nice. In other news, though, that person has tremendous power to change the application and, more importantly, the structure of justice. Tonight, I'm excited to be in conversation with our most recent former Cook County State's Attorney. Kim Foxx took maybe more criticism than any state's attorney in my memory. She was clear about her goal to transform the goals of prosecution. Instead of just focusing on conviction rates, she vigorously took on past wrongful convictions. Foxx acknowledged the role of criminal justice and racial disparities in the cycle of crime. And she opened the doors of data, digitizing and making public years of information about the decisions and the outcomes of Cook County's prosecutions. That transparency was clear during her 8 years in office. Now that she's stepped down, she can be even more candid. So we are speaking with attorney Kim Foxx right after this break.
Hi, I'm Bianca Cotton. Join me Mondays at 7 p.m. as I sit in conversation with incredible, dynamic, and complex Chicagoans who peel back the layers, living lessons, the joy, and the pain behind their confident smiles. Join the conversation Mondays at 7 p.m. on CAN-TV Cable Channel 19 and streaming on cantv.org and CAN-TV Plus app.
When former Cook County State's Attorney Kim Foxx decided not to run for a third term last year, it sparked a flurry of political turmoil, candidates, and some fundamental questions. Would the office continue with the historic reforms Foxx spearheaded, or would the direction rewind to the traditional tough on crime attitude? I know there's a problem with that first question because it's not that you were not tough on crime, but we'll get to that in a minute. Thank you so much for interrupting your well-deserved break to come back in the public eye.
For you, anything, you know that.
Well, you were also generally very available while you were in office, which was having covered multiple Cook County State's attorneys prior to you. I found that was kind of a departure. Yeah. So, can you tell us again why you left?
I mean, your intro says it all, but it was 8 years where I felt that we had made some substantial change both locally and nationally around the field of prosecution. I had given that job everything that I had while being a mother, while being a wife, while trying to be a friend and a daughter. And it was an exhausting endeavor, and it was time to move on.
So what have you been up to? Just laying around eating bonbons, getting massages?
Bonbons, massages, popcorn, Paradise on Hulu. It's been 3 months of resting and restoring and really being radical about my time and space and energy. And so it's been restorative.
So one of the reasons I'm so thankful that you're here, because I know you have had to say no a lot, which is something that people, but women and black women in particular, have a hard time doing. If they need me, I must go. Yeah. What's been the hardest thing to say no to?
You.
You didn't say no, you said next time.
Okay, catch me in a few weeks. I think that's it. I think I appreciate the people who want to engage and talk to me, but you said it, like as state's attorney, it was really important for me to be as open and available to all of our communities. And so there would be weeks at a time where I wasn't home for dinner, where I wasn't getting to bed before 10 or before like midnight. And so it hasn't actually been as hard as I thought it would be. I think once you set the boundary, once I said, and I said it, I trumpeted it before I left, everywhere I went, don't ask me for anything. for a minute. I need to rest. And I think people don't expect Black women to rest. I think it was, oh, she says she's going to rest, but if you do this one thing for me. And the first no opened the door for all the other no's. And with like love and respect and admiration, but I really needed to rest.
Now back to the question that I mentioned in the introduction, which was which direction the office would go, continue on the path you had set or depart. I said rewind, but I guess there could be other branches. You endorsed a candidate to replace you. He did not win.
Yes.
So did you feel like that was a rebuke of what you had done?
Not at all. I mean, when you look at the election results, it was the tightest state's attorney election, I think, in recent memory. I think the current state's attorney won that primary by less than 0.2% of the vote. And so I don't think it was a rebuke at all. I think it was two campaigns with two candidates who a lot of people didn't know about in a low turnout election. So I didn't feel it was a rebuke at all. In fact, I believe that turnout showed me that there were people who were really hoping that the transformations we were making would continue.
And it also would give the current state's attorney, Cook County State's Attorney, Eileen O'Neill Burke, I want to get the name right, reason to have to please more than just her base, because their base is just a tiny bit over half. And I don't imagine that is something a state's attorney should be thinking about anyway. What does my base want? It has to be what is right?
I think you come in with what is right always, but I think if you have to set priorities, you are trying to align your priorities for what's in the best interest of the people that you serve. And so it is a political job, but this is a job about justice and fairness, and dare I say equity, and that is universal. And sometimes that requires you, for your base who may not appreciate these issues because it is distant, right? The criminal justice system, the people who use it, the end users, are largely Black and brown folks, as defendants, as witnesses, as victims, as communities. And so one would assume that would be your base, the people who use the system. And so you have to be mindful of their needs and how the system has impacted them.
And some would say those are the people who are used by the system, but that's what keeps it going.
I think the system is doing exactly what it was designed to do. And so anyone who comes in and says that, they don't see that, like that race is not a factor, or that they don't see the particular needs of those communities, even if you are not from that community, I think it's being intellectually dishonest.
You can't. Let the facts get in the way of your nice, warm, and fuzzy belief of blind justice.
That's right.
Yet the criticism of you most often, I know. I used to work with for Superintendent Eddie Johnson, Chicago Police Department. And I think they might have coined the phrase "catch and release." Kim Foxx, that we catch them and she releases them.
Yeah.
But when you look at the data, it doesn't really prove true.
Yeah. No, I mean, catchphrases were a thing during my term, and that's why I was so determined to talk about data, that this work is so critically important, the ability to take someone's freedom, for victims who feel that they've been harmed to want to see justice. Like, this work was so critically important that we couldn't get lost in catchphrases and innuendo or stories. Like, what's the facts telling us? And that's why we made our data publicly available, like in raw form, where I'm not manipulating the data. I'm not trying to tell a story. It's like, here it is.
These are the pure numbers.
These are pure numbers. And no other prosecutor in this office had done that before. In fact, no other prosecutor across the country before we had done that.
So, and I want to point out that, they may have given you that name. And they didn't all, they weren't 100% in agreement with each other. There's divisions and support for you within the police department also. But I clearly recall former Cook County State's Attorney, 3 ago, before Anita Alvarez, Richard Devine, said, I have to have much more than the word of a police officer to proceed with the case. So, and he said that publicly, yet that he didn't get the same criticism, though he recognized that was not always factual.
Well, there was always a healthy tension between police and the prosecutor's office, because we aren't rubber stamps, right? The prosecutor is not supposed to rubber stamp, especially in a county that has this long history of wrongful convictions. If you look at how those happened, it was rubber stamping police work that was insufficient or torturous.
Downright criminal.
That's right. Like that, none of that happens. Even when we talk about John Burge, that had to go before a felony review assistant. That had to go before a prosecutor. And so we talk a lot about the police malfeasance, but that was in complicity with prosecutors.
With the prosecutor.
And so I think the difference was, yes, Richard Devine could say it.
Kim Foxx can't.
Kim Foxx can't.
It's heard differently.
Absolutely.
So is there pressure? We got to have high conviction rate, or or we're a failure.
No, we said from the outset that conviction rates were not going to be a measure of our success. I put it in my transition report. It was when I went around to the office saying that we weren't measuring your success as a prosecutor on convictions, because that incentive structure gets us to what we've seen before.
Where you get the lowest hanging fruit.
Low hanging fruit, win by
people.
any are our communities safer?
Right.
Do people trust us? And so we were really like, what is our mission? What are our vision? What are our values? We never outlined that. How do we know we're successful in the community? This county has been violent since I was born in 1972.
And let's point out that you are, I don't know if you're born there, but raised in Cabrini Green in Chicago.
Raised in Cabrini Green in Chicago, born and raised in Cabrini Green, where we were looking at homicide rates in the 70s and 80s that we would be astonished by today. And so the notion that what we have been doing has kept us safe, when for decades, we have reckoned and wrestled with this issue of violence. And so for me, it was, all right, we had high conviction rates in the 80s, and we also had homicide rates topping 1,000.
That were off the charts.
Yes.
So the idea that somehow you're doing less or not doing more of the same that already failed.
Correct.
Right? So that you're doing something new, and that people were characterizing it very differently. I love this. I have never seen a outgoing state's attorney put out a 66-page final report that went into such detail about what you've done. And I have pages marked here about felony data, right? Because that's what you're supposed to let go.
Yeah.
In 2017, 79% of the cases brought to you were approved. You said we approved these to go forward, and 84% were convicted.
Yeah.
And then you scoop up to, I don't know, 85% were approved in 2023, 77% convicted.
Yeah.
And then you include on each one of these, we all talk about felonies and gun violence, but one of the underlying things is domestic violence, and that's not something that gets talked about. So you include the domestic violence case approval rate and conviction rate in this report also. 90% of the cases brought to you for domestic violence got approved, and 84% brought convictions. But all it takes is one domestic violence offender to slip through the cracks or get released on their own recognizance and go back and do something horrible to say it's all a failure. How do you ever feel like you're winning in this?
I just tell the truth, right? You're absolutely right. These are human endeavors. We're talking about humans. That we're not making widgets, right? And so there are things that we do where we take risks, where we take chances, calculated risk, where we measure whether or not this is something that we should do. Should someone go home or not? Should we give somebody a second chance or a third chance? But we have to do that. And we have to tout our successes with the same fervor that folks tout when something goes wrong. If 99% of people are released on bond and show back up to court, and that one person who does something horrible, what happens to the stories of the 99?
Right.
And that's what was happening. We were seeing a distortion based on one example and then ignoring a willful ignorance of the facts and the data that lay before us.
So speaking of bond and bail and no cash bond, and which if they told us the world was coming to an end, and when you instituted that, with state lawmakers and part of your legislative agenda, that your getting out of jail while awaiting trial would no longer depend on how much money you had. What were the actual data verified results of that?
Well, after at least a year of it having been in play, we saw there was not an uptick in people who were released committing violent crime. We saw that people were returning to court in the same numbers that they were returning to court in the first place. And the year following the implementation of the Safety Act, we also saw violent crime in Cook County continue to go down. And so the narrative of, oh no, we're going to see an explosion of crime was absolutely debunked, that people weren't going to come back to court, absolutely
And
debunked.
they were going to go out and kill the witnesses or whatever the case
none
may
of that
be.
came, and we knew that because the data told us that that was what it was going to be.
And on the other hand, the result of someone being retained in Cook County Jail while they are awaiting trial, losing their job, their family doesn't have, whatever, all the
But the problem with it was nobody cared about those stories. Because there's an assumption, well, if you're in jail, then you must have done something. Having to remind people of the presumption of innocence, that bail wasn't pre-punishment, right? You're not punished before you go to trial. You're still considered innocent. And so even in telling the story around bail reform about the families that were having fish fries on Friday night to raise $500 to get somebody out of jail for a nonviolent offense, and those people having better outcomes when they went to trial. People who were able to work and be at home and be with their families were more often found not guilty than someone who was sitting in jail pre-trial for the same types of offenses.
You're sitting in jail pre-trial, you're likely to commit a crime while you're in there. Cook County Jail is not
it's awful. Or confess or plea to a case to get out. And we, and again, we bring the charges, and so as you said, the high percentage where we believe that our evidence will support the charge. But we also know that we're not infallible.
No, no perfection.
No.
So another part of your legislative agenda, which I think will impact more people than we really realize, is what police officers can do while interrogating a young person.
Yes.
We have just recently, I went to a book signing thing for the Hazel Boys, 4 young men, like they were 15, 16, 17, 19 or something when they were, separated and told, well, he said you did it. Well, he said you, and they all ended up life in prison. And they were all innocent. So what you can do when a young person is being questioned is changed by a law that you...
you could lie to a child. You could lie to a child in order to elicit a confession. And so we worked with a number of exonerees who were previously convicted as children to help us draft this legislation. And we were the first state in the country to have a law on the books that says that police could not lie to children.
Can they lie to adults? I just want to know in case I
They
get
can
picked
still
up.
lie to adults.
Okay, just checking. Just
can still
checking.
lie to adults. But young impressionable minds that doing that, and when we look at the convictions that have been overturned, particularly for young people at that time, where it was based on false confessions. It was based on...
Just tell us this and you go home to your mama.
Absolutely. And we said no more.
Well, and sometimes they were apparently targeting young people for whom family was not an option.
That's right.
One of the Hazel Boys was a ward of the state and really didn't have any place to stay at the time. So it's really cruel.
It's cruel, and it shocks the conscience because people don't know that was an acceptable part of the system. Like when I said that we're the first state to do it, 3 other states have now since done it. It shocks the conscience that would be okay.
I don't think that they always think of teenagers, especially black and brown teenagers, as children. So
I think that's right.
I think that could be a problem. But speaking of, people like to call us the murder capital of the country, which we're not.
We are not.
By the data. We were, however, the false confession capital of the country,
That's
Cook
right.
County in particular.
That's right.
Is it what'd you call it? Not the conviction. It used to be the conviction integrity
unit, and then we changed to the conviction review unit.
because we will look at it. We're
Yes,
not just going
all
to
of
not
it.
going to just make sure it can stand. We're going
That's
to make
right.
sure it should stand.
That's exactly right.
So almost 250 convictions that did not stand under that review.
Yeah.
People who've been in prison for decades.
People who've been in prison for decades, people who were given life sentences who thought that they were never going to come out, people who were given probation but still maybe didn't have to go into a jail cell, but when they had to fill out an application for a job, had to put that on there. It was incredibly important that we address that issue.
We had Brian Beals on this program, and he talked about his was not a false confession; it was just dumb interpretation of the evidence, and he just was released a year ago.
Yes.
And such talent he's bringing to the community. He's got a whole theater project, and so
very
we also,
engaged and down in Springfield legislating or advocating for legislation. Yeah.
You've also, you've created this kind of exonerated community
Yeah.
that are very focused on the folks they left behind.
Yeah.
So maybe some of the changes, no matter what policy changes may happen, some of the changes that you institute are going to have long legs.
Absolutely. The advocacy, I got a call earlier today from a student who worked on my campaign. She's at Yale Law now, and Brianna came from Lawndale, came from the hood, and was inspired by the work that we were doing and had such frustration around the system and said, you know what, you told me that we can do something about this. And she sent me a snippet from her Yale Law School class where they were talking about our office, our work. And so, no, I think in that time, it was worth the licks. It was worth all that was happening to me
I'm
personally.
checking you for bruises now. They seem to have all cleared up.
I put a little makeup on for that. It was worth it because I think there is a generation that is coming beyond us, whether it's law students or some of these men and women who've been released, who believe that there is purpose in what has happened to them, and they will be relentless in their pursuit.
So talking about the new administration, as we were talking
Sure.
about exonerated individuals, many of whom were convicted based on testimony by other young people who had been scared into testifying or worse. And there's been an announcement from the new state's attorney's office, the new state's attorney's same office, that they would be prosecuting people who had given false testimony. So if you recant, you must have lied then. So is that what is that kind of puts a chill on people's ability to come back and later tell the truth?
Yeah, and to be clear, I think I read the stories about that. And I don't know if there was a policy or this particular state's attorney on her own did that. I certainly would hope that wouldn't be a policy, that we recognize that is how this bad behavior flourished, in the fear and intimidation of people and their unwillingness to speak. Again, the research, the evidence, the data, not just from Cook County, across the country, tells us that this is how you elicit these types of confessions. And so we shouldn't do anything that would bar someone coming forward if they had not said anything before, or if they're contradicting what they said. Interrogate it. Ask them the questions, cross-examine them. But threatening people should never be in the equation, because that's how we got here in the first place.
Because we do understand the need to impress upon people the importance of being truthful when you're under
Absolutely.
oath. Real quick, and it's not a quick topic,
Yeah.
which is also about a change in approach. The Restorative Justice Community Courts, there are 4 of them, and the office has now decided that they will no longer receive gun possession cases, which was 82% of their caseload. Do you think that there is reason to be concerned?
I think that approaching gun possession cases in Cook County requires us to be thoughtful and innovative, and I think the restorative justice courts allowed for us to do that. There are other courthouses, prosecutor's offices across the country that do similar type work around restorative justice, around diversion type programs. And so my hope that, yes, we're 90 days into this administration, that looking at practices across the country would give us an opportunity to reevaluate the decision that's been made.
Wow, you really are. We're a politician. Once you answered that type right down the middle, I thought,
Well,
I got it.
You know, it's
Be open.
yeah. There's a level of, you know what it is. I want to give grace, right? As you talked about, I was picked apart from the moment that I walked into that office, and it's been not yet 90 days that this new administration is in. And I think there's a lot of learning that comes. I think there's a lot of decisions and posturing and positions that one takes, and then there's the reality that you're hit with. And so in a county that's been grappling with gun violence for so long, it may seem like, well, we want to look like we're taking a stronger stance and not do this. And then you realize, you know what, actually this is actually effective. And so I really hope that they come there. But I think it's early on the administration.
Yes, because if you compare the recidivism rates to
absolutely.
cases through restorative justice
Yes,
courts
the
versus...
data is clear. The data is clear that the restorative justice courts worked, particularly with this offense. And it would be a shame that if we lost the momentum around the work that was being done there.
So what can we do? Those of us who, people don't always pay attention to the state's attorney's office until some big cases in the headlines.
Yeah.
What can we do besides, as you say, pick at, criticize?
Hold to account. I mean, part of the reason that I was out so much is I had to go sit in community with the people who were impacted by my decisions. And I think oftentimes, you get these big roles and you get nice offices that are like on high floors that you don't have to have that level of engagement. I think we shouldn't wait till something terrible happens. come to meet with exonerees. I remember the first time I went to the torture center and sat with Burge victims, and they were walking me around the center showing me their names on the wall and what it meant for them to have a prosecutor come sit with.
But you didn't have to go.
Absolutely not.
So how do we bring the state's attorney in? I'm not saying she wouldn't want to come, so we have to invite.
You got to invite. You have, because then it gives excuse of not going.
Right. You
have to make the invitation. You have to ask for the meeting.
Okay.
And not just in community. I joke. I remember the first week I was in office, we had a bunch of community activists come for a meeting that we had set. And the people at the front desk said, "Oh my gosh, Gator Bradley is here. He's on our do not let upstairs list."
Do not let upstairs.
There was a do not let upstairs list.
And there is, speaking of which, there was a do not call list that you established for police officers who should not be called as witnesses because they've proven themselves not credible.
Absolutely.
I'm going to end on that last thing, but it's all in this book, folks. I've saved a tiny bit of time so that you don't have to feel like you have to explain extensively what's next for you.
Yeah. Rest. I'm still going to rest. There is some teaching that I'm doing right now at University of Pennsylvania Law School. I'm a Model Fellow there this semester.
Congratulations.
Thank you. Breaking news here. I haven't talked about it much. So there's teaching opportunities. I'm writing. I think there's a book that is worthy of being published.
Sure.
Oh, for sure.
Okay.
There's a story to be told about doing this work as a Black woman in the era of George Floyd, in the false confession capital of the United States, having come from Cabrini. How we put all that together, I don't know, but that is something I'm eager to do.
I can't wait to see. Thank you so much.
Thank you.
All right, Kim Foxx, the most recent former Cook County State's Attorney who has made changes that really can't be undone. And we're happy for that. Right after this break, I'm back with this edition for this week of Robin's Nest. Stay with us.
Every community has a story, a pulse, a voice waiting to be heard. At CAN TV, we bring these stories to life, from the heart of Chicago to your living room. Join us in supporting hyper-local television. Your backing helps us cover what matters directly in our communities, unfiltered and upfront. Help tell the important stories of our communities. Become a program underwriter today.
Thanks again to Kim Foxx for taking a pause in her well-deserved break from the limelight to share with us her insights on justice and prosecution. Thank you, of course, for tuning in. We always welcome your feedback, or if you just want to say hi, robin'sothernews@gmail.com. Now, this is the part in Other News where I usually share an idea, or maybe a couple, inspired by the conversation. Try to find some sort of action item for you to consider. On this topic, though, so important in everyday local life, the jury is still out for me. There is literally a new sheriff in town. Eileen O'Neill Burke is in the hot seat now. I'm sure she did not go there to fail. The question is, what does she consider success? Critics all ready to pounce on her every move. After deciding not to proceed with charges filed against an Oak Park police officer, there was talk that she won't be willing to hold cops accountable. A lot of people are worried after she removed gun possession cases from the restorative justice community courts. I'm ready to see the results of those moves and to listen. Does she acknowledge the long-standing racial disparity of arrests, charges, trials, and convictions? The thin line for Black people between prosecution and persecution. Of course, we have invited State's Attorney Burke to join us on the program. More important than hearing what she has to say, let's watch what she does. Now, I was impressed with something she said while campaigning, talking about what the State's Attorney's office needs to accomplish. She said, quote, "It requires thoughtful reform and restorative justice." Let's see.